Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Preparing a message such as this doesn't come without some fear of trepidation, although it's far exceeded by fear of a wardrobe malfunction. But, it's good to have you in the Lord's house today on this November 23rd, 2014. I'm here today as John Peter Muhlenberg, born October 1st, 1746, died on my 61st birthday in 1807. Why would I choose to be here with you today at Believers Fellowship? I came to share just a bit of my story and that of some of my colleagues. My hope is that you would come to understand a bit of where we started as a nation and as a light for you to seek direction henceforth. The Word of God says in Proverbs 14:34, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Not a politically correct statement, as a term I'm hearing you use in these days. A lot of things I find interesting in these times that are far different from when I grew up. The horseless carriage is an endless fascination to me. Cordless microphone is certainly easier on the vocal cords. But I can understand why your economy is in trouble because nothing costs anything anymore. You simply take out a piece of plastic, hand it to them, and they smile and hand it right back. So there's a lot going on I don't fully understand. But I want to say that the Word of God is endless. It's as true today as it was then. It's as relevant today as it was then. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Sadly, in our day, the problem has come within the church that some may seek righteousness privately, but the church, as I see it, is failing to live it out outside the walls. Pastors, for the most part, seem to have forgotten our role to be salt and light in the affairs of state as well as in matters of daily life. The first Chief Justice, John Jay, stated, Providence has given to our people the choice of their leaders, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our nation, our Christian nation, to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Folks, we better remember that and reclaim that reality. According to Ralph Reed, Robert Barton, the last in 2008 elections, 28 million evangelical Christians either were not registered or simply did not bother to vote. Far more than needed to sway any election. Psalm 9:17 says, the wicked shall return unto hell, and those nations that forget God. I understand there are people in America who don't hold Christian beliefs, and that's always been the case. That's not a problem when God's people continue to hold up His standard and bring it to bear in the market square. People can have their freedom, but let not immorality or amorality be forced upon the people of God. Charles Finney said, Christians act as if they think God does not see what they do in politics. But I tell you, He does see it, and He will bless or curse this nation according to the course Christians take. A great pastor of your era, who's now with the Lord, I've enjoyed getting to know him, Adrian Rogers, said government is God's idea. It is inconceivable that He would create government and then tell His people to stay out of it. To help you grasp the importance of this, let me share a bit of my story. I was a Lutheran pastor in the church in Woodstock, Virginia. On January 21st, 1776, I preached on Ecclesiastes 3:8. There is a time of peace and a time of war. The English oppression upon the colonies had reached a fever pitch. And at the conclusion of my sermon, I told the people on January 21st, 1776, I said, there's a time for all things. A time to preach and a time to pray. But there's also a time to fight, and that time is now. And I removed my clerical robe. I didn't wear it today because I'm told Believers Fellowship is in. But I removed my clerical robe to reveal the army, the uniform of a Continental Army officer. I had enlisted a couple of days before, under commission by General George Washington himself, to raise a regiment. And that day we led 300 men to form the 8th Virginia Regiment. I led those men throughout the war, men of my church and men of my community. And at the conclusion of the war, when we attained our independence, I was present at the surrender of Cornwallis. Today in the rotunda of your capital, there's a statue of me. Over my right arm is a clerical robe, and in my left hand is my sword. But I wasn't the only fighting preacher. Many of my colleagues also led their men of their congregations into battle. Prominent among them were my Presbyterian friends. Reverend James Caldwell, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, was called the high priest of the rebellion. On one day when there was a battle, he led his men into a town, and in the battle it became hot, and the muskets, they ran out of wadding for their muskets, which would render their weapons useless. He ran to the Presbyterian church there and gathered up hymn books. A prominent hymn writer that day was Isaac Watts. And so he brought the hymn books down and had them tear pages out of the hymn books to make wadding for their muskets. And he prodded the men on, saying, "Give them Watts, boys, give them Watts." Which is where the birth of that saying that you still use today, give them what for. King George called the revolution a Presbyterian rebellion. Okay, they got bigger billing than we did, but they were a prominent part. American historian Alice Baldwin in 1918 wrote, "The American Revolution and the American independence were the children of the pulpit." Pastors led the way. Historian B.F. Morris said, "The ministers of the Revolution were, like their Puritan predecessors, bold and fearless in the cause of their country. No class of men contributed more to carry forward the revolution and achieve our independence than did the ministers. By prayers, patriotic sermons, and services they rendered to the highest assistance, the civil government, the army, and the country." John Adams said, "It is the duty of the clergy to accommodate their discourses to the times, to preach against such sins as are most prevalent, and recommend such virtues as are most wanted. If public spirit is much wanted, should they not inculcate this great virtue?" Beloved people, the people of God need to rise up in righteousness and holiness. John Adams stated the pulpits have plenty. Just a few years ago in the state of Alabama, there was an attempt to bring a lottery into that state. And the churches rose up and stopped it. Why couldn't it have happened in your great state of Tennessee? In April 18, 1775, You all heard of the famous ride of Paul Revere. But did you know where he was going as he rode through the town shouting the redcoats are coming? He was headed to the home of Pastor Jonas Clark in Lexington. And in his home that night, he had two special guests, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, which is largely believed was one reason the British were so had their focus on Lexington. Jonas Clark and Deacon John Parker had for months prior been training their men on Sunday afternoons how to fight. When Paul Revere came up and shared that the redcoats were coming, Adams and Hancock and Jonas Clark walked out of the house. And they asked Pastor Clark, "Will the men fight?" And he said, "I trained them for this very hour. They would fight, and if need be, die too, under the shadow of the house of God." April 19th, the next day, they were led into battle. Captain Parker, Deacon Parker, said, "Men, stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." Who were the men they referred to? These are the men we know of as the Minutemen. When they were approached, the British officer shouted, "Throw down your arms in the name of the King of England." The Minutemen responded, "We recognize no sovereign but God and no king but Jesus." Beloved, is that our attitude today? It should be. Then a shot was fired. The shot we know as the shot heard round the world. And on that sad day, 49 colonists were killed and 39 more wounded. 1 year later, Pastor Clark, who fought alongside his men, preached a sermon. Sermon titles today seem to be short and catchy. They try to catch your interest. The title of this sermon was "The Fate of Bloodthirsty Oppressors and God's Tender Care of His Distressed People." I'm saying sermons shorter. He didn't hold back. Reverend George Duffield, pastor, said, "Quick as a flash of lightning glares from pole to pole, so sudden did a military spirit pervade those then limited colonies. Nor were those in the sacred order, the preachers, wanting to their country when her civil and religious liberties were all at stake. But as became faithful watchmen, they blew the trumpet on the walls out of Zion and sounded an alarm for defense." Reverend Thomas Allen served as chaplain and commander of the Berkshire Militia. On August 16, 1777, he fought the Battle of Bennington. And he said, as they marched to battle, "We shall have a good time at the enemy, but we are not quite ready yet. We must first join in prayer." Beloved people, we battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, rulers of darkness and high places. Let's put on the full armor of God that we can stand against the fiery darts of the wicked. But stand we must. When the enemy approached, Reverend Allen mounted a stump in his clerical garb and called for them to surrender. The response was a volley of musket fire, one round passing through his hat. So he descended the stump and he fought in the ranks of his soldiers that day. How did all this come about? Much of it was born out of the Great Awakening, the first Great Awakening a few decades prior. When people came to God in large numbers, the pastors adopted this and recognized their God-given role to lead their people in truth and righteousness. Thomas Newton, pastor, said, "The Scriptures, though often perverted to the purposes of tyranny, are yet in their own nature calculated to promote the civil as well as the religious liberties of mankind." Episcopal pastor, historian Frank Moore said in 1862, preachers of the revolution did not hesitate to attack the great political and social evils of their day. Why don't they do it today? Fear of getting fired, perhaps justifiably fearful of getting fired. But stand we must, and pay the price, if we must, of truth. Episcopal Pastor Reverend William Smith said, religion and liberty must flourish or fall together in America. We pray that both may be perpetual. Your religious liberty will not live, it will not survive if you ignore civil liberty and stand for religious liberty. Reverend John Witherspoon, one of the few pastors who actually signed the Declaration of Independence. At the signing, someone made the statement, "We are not ripe for revolution." Witherspoon replied, "Not ripe, sir? In my judgment, we're not only ripe, but unless some action is taken, we will be rotting." Beloved people, we're ripe. Take a stand. Fresh stand. Congregationalist Pastor Duché preached a sermon in 1775 stating, comparing spiritual liberty and civil liberty. He said, "I believe it will be no difficult matter to prove that the latter is as much the gift of God in Jesus Christ as the former, and consequently that we're bound to stand fast in our civil as well as our spiritual freedom." Pastor Charles Thompson entered the American Army after his church and home were burned by the British. Captured and held on a prison ship in New Jersey, Newport, New Jersey, in some of the most squalid conditions. Baptist pastor Joab Houghton, pastor of First Baptist Church, Hopewell, became a lieutenant colonel, and after the war was elected to the state legislature in New Jersey. April 23rd, 1775, after hearing the attack of the Minutemen on the Minutemen, he said, "Men of New Jersey, the redcoats are murdering our brethren of New England. Who follows me to Boston?" John Quincy Adams, the sixth president, said, "The greatest glory of the revolution was that it bound together in one dissoluble bond the principles of Christianity and the principles of civil government." Our government was established reflecting biblical principles. It allows for freedom. But you have to have a moral foundation to build on, or you have no foundation at all. Henry Beecher Ward, Presbyterian pastor, said in 1863, "It's sometimes said that ministers must not preach politics. They would have to toe hop and skip and jump through 2/3 of the Bible if they did not. For there's not another book on the face of God's earth that is so full of commerce and business and government, and the relationship between the governing and the governed, as this same Bible. And yet, in these latter days, we have these ineffable men who will tell us we must not preach in the pulpit about public affairs, and who would scourge out of the sanctuary a full half of the Bible. Infidels! End quote. Charles Finney said, and I believe this is true, "If there's a decay of the conscience, the pulpit is responsible. If the public press lacks moral discernment, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the world loses its interest in Christianity, the pulpit is responsible for it. If Satan rules in our halls of legislation, the pulpit is responsible for it. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundations of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit is responsible for it." Why are the men of God afraid? In 1954, Lyndon Johnson was being attacked by some conservative groups, and he wanted to silence them. In an amendment passed on the floor of the Senate in the IRS code, it stated that nonprofits cannot speak for or against a candidate. That's really all it said. Now, that in itself is unconstitutional. They're making a law regarding the practice of religion and hindering free speech. That is unconstitutional. But that is all they said. So why then have we then retreated so far from that we not only won't speak against a candidate, we won't speak about anything. If there's any legislation attacked to a moral issue, suddenly it becomes off grounds for pastors to speak on. Nonsense! This is leading to the moral decline of the country that I worked hard to establish, that many gave to shed their blood to establish. And we fail in pretending today and defending. My own brother, Frederick Muhlenberg, also a pastor, once wrote me a letter and said, "Brother, you need to stay out of politics. Stay out of it. Stick to preaching the gospel." He lived in New York City. And when the British conquered New York City, his church and the parsonage were burned to the ground. He and his family were forced to flee. To make a long story short, he became the first Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States. He saw the heat, saw the light when he felt the heat. Such should be the way today with pastors and our political leaders. Samuel Adams said, "If a time should ever come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." Brothers and sisters of Believers Fellowship, that time is now. You have political leaders who are little more than opportunists. Your friend, they're in both parties. Educate yourselves. Get to know the people in office, the leaders, their character, their beliefs, their morality. The time is now to speak up and let them feel the heat and share the light. In World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a fellow Lutheran pastor, stated, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." I do know what's happening in our day when someone begins to speak on a moral issue or a sin of the day, you're immediately labeled a hater or a bigot. Don't be a hater, don't be a bigot, but keep speaking. And don't let a false label intimidate you. Isaiah 56, 10 and 11 says, in closing, speaks of pastors. "His watchmen are blind, they're all ignorant, they're dumb dogs, they cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yes, they're greedy dogs, which never have enough, and they're shepherds who cannot understand. They all look out for their own way, everyone for his own gain, from his own territory." Now, folks, that's not all pastors. I know that, and you know that. But there are many today seeking little more than a profiteer off the backs of the hurting people, sharing a gospel that is no gospel at all, to make people feel good, to get their money. The Word of God is inerrant and true, and we have a calling to stand, to speak to the issues of the day. Call out a president who would disintegrate our borders and allow them to stand porous. And by the way, he's not the first president to do so. They've been porous for a long time, and our country needs to be defended. Our border should be secure. What do you do with all those who are already here? There can be no meaningful discussion of that until the border is secure. Call out your leaders. And wow, preacher, you're getting into an issue. I sure am. Call them out. Let them know. Secure border. The Islamic threat. Thomas Jefferson It's been spoken about how he owned a Quran. Yes, he owned it in order to understand what was making these people tick in defense against the Barbary pirates. Folks, that theology has not changed. We don't need to be haters. There are people who have been born into that culture who don't even know what the practices and beliefs are, who can be reached for Christ. We should be ever willing and wanting to do that, but at the same time, we must protect the homeland. Pastors, don't be blind watchmen. The gospel is primary, and civil liberties are also a gift from God and must be defended. They won't be defended if the men of God don't lead their people to do so. My hope is and prayer is that fellow pastors will heed that truth. I'm thankful for the research of Brother Dan Smith, pastor in Oklahoma, from where I gleaned much of the information I shared with you today. And I'm thankful that these men, by the way, were known as the Black Robed Regiment, denoted by their clerical guard. I'm thankful for them and for their heritage, and I pray we'll reclaim it and lead God's people to take a stand in an appropriate way, when and where needed. The time is now. Father, you said in your word that if your people who call by your name will humble themselves and pray and seek your face and turn from their wicked ways, then you will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. Father, in the precious name of Jesus, we ask you to forgive us when we've been silent. Give us a holy boldness and wisdom to know how and when to speak. And Father, we pray you would forgive us, fill us with your Spirit, restore us, and Father, send revival to the land, a true awakening. So desperately needed. That people turn back and recognize your moral absolutes are timeless and true. And once again, out of love for you and in your love, adopt a life of holiness. One that glorifies you and shines your light that others are drawn to you. And help us to be the salt and light you called us to be. We ask in Jesus' name. And God's people said, Amen.